Today on the podcast, I speak with Bradley Hammer. He is the founder of Blueprint OS, the Blueprint operating system. And it was a really fun conversation. This is someone that was a solo entrepreneur, built up a business, burnt himself out, went into a panic attack, and realized I've got to change things. And as he was able to fire himself and delegate himself out of the business, it was actually able to double and go to kind of mid seven figures. And since then, he's been on a tear. He now has five companies approaching 30 million in total value. But on this podcast, we talk about some really fun concepts. One is this idea of how you go from Rainmaker to architect of your business, how to go from working in your business to on and above your business. He also gets really tactical on common mistakes people make in doing this. He talks about the system of getting buy-in to lead yourself first and then getting your team on board. He also talks about some tactics on what to do as rituals on like a daily, weekly, and quarterly basis to force yourself to work on the business and above the business. For me, it was really helpful just to hear his journey and how he's done it. It's super tactical and helpful. So if anyone here is kind of stuck where you've hit a wall, I think that's going to be helpful to give you some ideas on how to break through. He also talks about this idea of 10x is easier than 2x and going through that exercise with the strategic coach group. But this is a really fun one. I would really ask you to check it out, especially if you're looking to kind of scale yourself to get out of the day-to-day combat of business and go to that next level. So hope you enjoy today's podcast.
You cannot invent and pioneer if you cannot accept failure.
We wanted people that were insanely great at what they did.
Nobody was making any money at all. Most people thought the internet was going to be a fad.
Bradley, let's just get right to it. How the heck do you get out of being a cog in your own machine that is a business and break out to actually have a business that can run without you? There's this book, I always butcher the title of it. It's Simple Number, Straight Talk, Big Profits. And it talks about like unlocking your business potential. But there's something in that book that talks about the black hole of death for business when you're between 1 to 5 million in sales, between like 20 to 80 people. And that's where most businesses go to die. They like just can't get out of it. So as I saw what you're doing with Blueprint OS, I was like, oh, Bradley's created a way to break out of the black hole. Um, but I know that's a big question. But talk to me how business owners should approach this.
Yeah. Well, for me, an event. It took a health event for me to break out of it. My hope is that for people listening, that it wouldn't take something like that happening to get you to change. So the simple part of my story, we can dive into elements of this at some point if you want to, but when I started my business, I knew I had two skills. I knew how to bust my tail, and I picked that up from my dad. My dad is a farmer. He's in agriculture. It's just what you do. My dad didn't teach me that. You just caught it. You just saw my dad work 7 days a week. He missed, games. He wasn't coaching my teams when I was growing up. I mean, he was just in the field, harvest time and planting. And so I just picked that up from him of what it actually takes from hard work. And then right out of college, I got jobs in sales. And so I felt like I knew how to talk to people and I knew how to sell. And here's the thing, it worked. It's exactly what the business needed to get it, that initial launch, to get lift into the business. And it worked up until the point it didn't. And it worked until I basically ran out of time. And so all of those things, the entire business revolved around me. It was a personality driven business. And I don't mean personal brand. It was just, I was the business and the business was me. Okay. And so I categorized that I was the rainmaker of the business. right? If Bradley was pushing on the business, if I was there every day pushing on it, doing, and then it would move. Well, that works until the business gets bigger than you. And what I mean by that is there's too many customers, there's more than I can handle. And so if the only thing that you have, the only lever that you've had, which is to go faster, is on the ground and you burn out, now what are you going to do? And that's part of my story. So to answer your question, how do we do that? I think we can both see that sometimes your greatest strength as an entrepreneur can become a debilitating weakness in your business. And there's a different way to approach it. And so the simple but yet complex answer is, for me, I think you need to become the architect of your business.
Yeah. And it's so I heard this quote that you're really kind of highlighting, which is the strength of the CEO is the weakness of the company. And that's why it's so hard. And you have another good quote that you talk about from Rainmaker to Architect. And I think so many businesses it gets started and that CEO it's the rainmaker and they're able to fire themselves from other things, maybe like operations or fulfillment, customer service, marketing, but for whatever reason, sales is like the last domino to fall. I'm in it right now, right? Trying to fire myself from sales and it's really hard. And so I don't know if that's like where to start, but like how do people approach, because I think that's where people get stuck and how they're unable to go to architect because they're stuck in that rainmaker mode. But would love your thoughts for people that are in that position, where to start or how to even approach that.
So I see you're an avid reader. I see the books behind you, and a lot of the books that I was reading back during that period of time would tell you, well, figure out what you're good at and just go do more of that. So I was like, okay, well, that makes sense to me. So I'll just do the things I'm really, really good at. Well, again, what happens then whenever you it was what was needed at one time, but that no longer is working. And so then I would say, okay, well then I just need to triple down. I would hear this before, triple down on your strengths. Now look, I'm not going to be contrarian on this podcast and then say, okay, no, you need to do something opposite of that. At the end of the day, I needed to approach the business differently. I need to approach it like I was the architect of the business and then go design it, build it, and then install it. And so, look, I didn't have this language whenever I was fixing my own business, but really repairing me first and foremost, and then fixing the business. But at the end of the day, what come to now realize is that the business actually had an operating system. It was just me. It was a UOS. It was a U operating system, or in my case, it was a Bradley operating system. And so I needed to create something outside of me. I need to create an operating system that was not solely reliant upon me. Now, I still, in that business and then the other businesses I have equity in, I still hold an important part in the organization, vision casting, etc. But everything wasn't dependent upon me. Sales wasn't dependent upon me. Delivery, once the person came on board, wasn't dependent upon me. Marketing is not dependent upon me. All of those type of things is not solely dependent upon me. The operations of the business now runs like a well-oiled machine versus what it was before was more like a hand crank. If I was cranking it, then it would move forward. And so really, I would encourage people to think, number one, you want to go through, there's like two journeys. The journey you're on as the entrepreneur, and then there's the journey that the business is on. And so what we'd like to say is Rainmaker to Architect is who you become. Blueprint OS is how you get there. Because if you become the architect, what do architects use? They use blueprints. And hence, that's why our company and our program is called Blueprint OS, is to help people to upgrade their operating system from a U operating system where everything's dependent upon you to a blueprint operating system to where it actually runs on something outside of them. And last thing I'll say on this is an operating system is not a concept. It's an actual thing. See, sometimes people think that this idea of an operating system or an OS is like this conceptual idea, like a mental model that we hold. Jim, it's not. It's an actual thing you can point to that says, here is our OS. This is how it's actually structured. That's an important distinction I want to make.
No, that's a good call. It's actionable and tangible. So like, I'm sold. Let's do this. Rainmaker to architect, and we could go a few different ways. But one thing I'm thinking through is, what are the common mistakes or landmines I should be aware of as I go down this path? Because obviously everything's easier said than done once you get in the trenches. But any advice for people for the common mistakes I need to look out for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So whenever you're creating an operating system and you're starting to make this journey, I do believe first and foremost, it does start that you see yourself as the architect, but then it gets into, okay, I want to create an operating system. I really want something to exist outside of me. Well, in my journey, I 2015, I burned out. I found myself in Toronto, and I'm actually a strategic coach. I'm in strategic coach, and we're doing the 10x exercise. And so I'm sitting next to a guy I'd never had met before. This is obviously way before the book, which has now come out. But we're doing that exercise, and so I'm sitting next to this guy, and he says, "Well, so last year we did 40 million in top line revenue. I made 5 million personally. So here's what 400 million and 50 would look like." So he goes through it on a one page and then he goes, "Okay, now you go." I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm not about to go. You make more personally per month than my business did in a year. Like, I'm embarrassed on my numbers." And he was super kind. That's a dead true story. And he said he was really kind about it. And he said something that I'd heard for years. And I pretty much said something snarky back to him. He said, "Man, it's just systems and processes." And I was like, "Oh my gosh. If I hear that one more time, nobody ever shows me what it actually looked like." That's what I said. And he said, "Well, look, at lunch. At lunch, I'll show you." And he did. And that is the moment I changed, because I actually, it's almost like you fundamentally, forevermore, the bar has been raised to a level of, oh, oh, that's what it takes. And so he told me at lunch, because Bradley, I just got my business out of my head. That's what it was. He was a financial advisor, and so he was doing well, making a couple $100,000 as a financial advisor. But then he built a company instead of him doing it, and he just documented what he did, and he built a $40 million company. Now I haven't seen what he's done since then, but my guess is probably pretty well. And so now look, it took me a long time. So to get to your question, the first thing I would encourage people to do is when they hear that, they do what I probably did when I came back immediately from Toronto. And that was, I'm going to go document everything we do in the business. Well, then you end up with a 175 page, document that nobody looks at, right? And so at the end of the day, I would encourage you to understand that you have Rembrandts in the attic, meaning you have assets sitting on your desktop right now, in your Google Drive, in your Dropbox, in your SharePoint Drive, whatever you're using. You already have a tremendous amount of assets. What an operating system does for the business, it's an organizing function. It allows you to remove the scavenger hunts. People are looking for, hey, where's that tracking thing that we use? Where's that document we use? Where is that thing? You eliminate all of that. The second thing is you got to come to terms with like what certain things meant. And what I mean by that is, people throw around SOPs, playbooks, systems, process, checklists, procedures, and do a quick Google search. You're just going to get more confused. I mean, I would do it and I was like, wait a minute, is that a playbook or is that a system? And so, look, it took me a couple of years to kind of like work through, wait a minute, okay, where am I going to put these things and what am I going to call that sort of thing? And so at the end of the day, that's what we teach people to do. We basically allow you to create something that, maybe an analogy like this would help is when you do your laundry and you finish the load of clothes from the washer and the dryer, you don't just take the clothes and go randomly putting them in like under your sink. You don't put all your socks and go put them under the sink. Why? because you want to know where they are when you go looking for your socks. But we tend to spin up documents, Jim, based on speed and not on retrieval. And just like you would never go put your socks under the sink, right? Or you would never go put your jeans in the garage. That's ridiculous. You also want to do that with an operating system where you're putting things to where we can now find them in the future, both you and your team. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense because I like that they call it on SOPs and playbooks, but it's like make things that are functional, useful, people will read, and in a place where they're actually useful and actionable. What one kind of aside that's so cool, you did the 10x exercise. I believe it's Stan Sullivan, where it's 10x is easier than 2x. For people that don't know, and I've never gone through it, could you give color on that? Because I think there's some alignment between that and what you're doing with Blueprint and OS. But just tell people what it is, and would love any experience share on what that was like going through that exercise.
Well, obviously, in that moment, it was life changing because of specifically what he shared. And I will tell you, even at that moment, and I had been in business, nobody had talked openly around revenue, profitability, and personal income numbers as much as he had. He just threw them out there, and it was like it wasn't even he wasn't bragging about it. It was just what the numbers are, and that both was uncomfortable for me, but also it was incredibly impactful. To answer your question, yes, there is a lot of alignment because see, I tried to 2x the business all the time, and so the idea from the book is that if you just try to 2x, you will just try to work harder. You will just try to work more, you'll work more hours. But the reality is you cannot work 10 times harder, right? So if you're already as a business owner working 2,500 hours in a year, well, if you want to 10x the business, you can't 10x the number of hours. There's only 8,700 or so hours in a year. So you're not going to work 25,000 hours, okay, in a year to make that happen. And so that is the idea, is it fundamentally forces you to think different. And I would argue that thinking different is to start seeing yourself as the architect of your business.
Um, no, that's very cool. And so, yeah, I'm actually reading that book right now. So you saying that was very timely, and it definitely kind of opens your mind to think differently, right? And finding the who's right is another book that they push out there. So you have this other phrase that caught my attention as you're going from rainmaker to architect, building this blueprint, and working on, in, and above the business. Because I struggle sometimes as a business owner where it's like, I'm at the 30,000 foot level thinking strategically, that's exciting, but then there are times I've got to zoom in and I've got to get in the nitty gritty and do things. But it's also being aware of, like, okay, what's urgent, what's important, what should I do, what should I delegate. And as I saw you kind of alluding to that, I'm like, man, that's hard. That's the struggle and the juggle that we're all dealing with when trying to grow and scale a business. And I think as you're going to architect, that's something you have to manage that dance. But would love your thoughts on how to approach that.
Yeah. So the name of my podcast is actually called Above the Business. We rebranded it about a year ago. We had started to consider some rebranding, and uh, my partner with that business came to me and said, "Yeah, I think we should rebrand it." I said, "Yeah, I do too. I already know what it's going to be called." And he said, "Really? You do?" I said, "Yeah, it should be called Above the Business," because at the time the podcast was more of a leadership, or at least it was titled a leadership podcast, but it really is a more of a business podcast, and not just about leadership. And so that idea, that is a concept, but that concept is very much a nod to the E-Myth and Gerber, and where he says, "Hey, you got to learn to work on it, not in it, all the time." I agree. I just think there's also a third dimension, which is to get above the business. And so, as some examples, when I was at Strategic Coach, that becomes a forcing function for someone to get above the business. I actually believe, Jim, them people listening to your podcast, They may be working out. They may be driving, to go to the grocery store. They may be in the grocery store. I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm in the grocery store. Um, Whatever they may be doing, they, by that nature, are above the business in that moment. But there are some things that we need to do intentionally to get above the business. And I'll give you just a couple. One is a weekly thinking time session, a 60 to 90 minute once a week that you have in your week that is spent away from your office. And even if you have a home office, away from your home office. I like to go to Starbucks. I like coffee. So I'll go to Starbucks to do mine. So that's one thing. It's on your calendar to go do an hour of thinking time. If people want to learn more about that, there's a great book, my favorite business book that I've ever read, The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham.
Wait, The Road Less Stupid?
Oh, have you not heard about this
No,
book?
I love that title. Sorry, I want to make sure I caught that. Keep
Oh,
going. Very
Jim,
cool.
that is my all-time favorite business book, and I've read a lot of books. That book is that he is exceptional. For those of you that don't know, Keith is the headline speaker at Tony Robbins' business mastery events, and secondly, he is the rich dad in Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Oh, really? Oh, crazy.
He is actually the rich dad in Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yeah. Um, anyway, Keith and Robert Kiyosaki don't have a good relationship, but that's neither here nor there. Bottom line is Keith is the rich dad and Rich Dad Poor Dad. Okay, so back to what I was saying. So that's one way to get above the business is first to have once a week 60 to 90 minutes. I think the most important thing you can do for your business is to spend time thinking about your business. We're working on a new lead, like a lead magnet, basically, for our company. I'm simplifying some things together, and I spent 45 minutes just this morning drinking coffee with a notepad and listening to some music, uh, thinking through that specifically. So I think thinking time but The Road Less Stupid portrays exactly how to do thinking time in an excellent way. So go read that book. And then I will tell you the other two major times is quarterly and then once a year. So every March, June, and September at the end of the quarter, week 13 is to spend a half a day out of the office. And I know that seems like a lot to some people, but really get away from the office, go spend a half a day and reflect back on the previous quarter and then project forward to the next quarter. So those are two forcing functions that I think can really help you to get above the business.
That's cool. I love the idea of the weekly ritual. And just to go like a little bit deeper and nerd out on that, any advice to give to people? It's like, okay, it's an hour, it's 90 minutes. I'm at the coffee shop, I'm walking, I'm wherever away from my office. Any advice on what not to or to do? Should I maybe come prepared? It's like, here's some things that I want to think through in that time. I maybe have a list, or any prompts, or maybe I'm overthinking. It's like, just go away for an hour and think about the business,
No,
and
no,
and
no,
you're good.
no. Actually, you're not overthinking it at all. No, so we'll nerd down on this. Actually, we actually teach this in our program how to do this well, because I actually think if you don't do it well, we've initially when I was teaching this, and again, always giving credit to Keith Cunningham, but when we brought it into our program for people, they would do exactly what you would say is that they would go to Starbucks and they were like, okay, so what what do I
What do
think
I do
about?
here?
Okay. So yeah. All right. So first of all, I ritualize this. All right. So in other words, I'm going to go to Starbucks. I actually have thinking time music. Like I like Morgan Wallen, but I'm not listening to Morgan Wallen when I'm doing this. Okay. Like it's kind of like, it's not audible music. It's like background music basically. Okay. Also no iPads, no computers. You can't be typing it. Even if you don't love to write, you can ultimately transfer your information from the pad to digital, which we always do. I always make it to a Google Doc eventually. But in those sessions, it's me, a pen, and my notepad. And there's some notepads I like to use for me. And we really do teach people to find that spot, find the coffee shop that you really love. You love the vibe. Go to the library. If it's too quiet for me, I don't like that. Okay, that's why I like a Starbucks, because it can be loud and I like the movement in there. But I'm listening to some background music, and then I walk into it with a question. I walk into it with a question. And so, for instance, this thing I was telling you about today is called the starter kit. And so I walked in and I said, okay, well, what is I need to think about this starter kit. And then I put down what needs to be true in order for us to launch the starter kit and for it to be impactful and to be a lead generator for our business. Like, that was the question. And so then I just started to write down in bullet points. And so it's bullet point, write something, bullet point, write something. And I don't judge what I'm writing. I just wrote it down. I said, well, I want 1,000 opt-ins. We're going to get 1,000 opt-ins on this starter kit until I launch another. I'm not launching anything else until I get 1,000 opt-ins. Okay. It needs to be simple. And I'm not going to go down that path anymore, but that's what I did. And the only thing I thought about during that period of time was the starter kit. And so in the end, I kind of summarized it, and then eventually it'll make its way to Slack within our team. And, here's what we're doing, and, here's our plan to roll it out, and here's what I need to do with it, et cetera. So that's my recommendations.
No, that's super helpful. I think those little kind of tips can help people do that, because I could see people kind of twiddling their thumbs a little bit. And time is so precious. You want it to be impactful. Well, very cool. So I actually want to go to hear more about you as a business owner, just the story of, like, getting into entrepreneurship and then to where you're at today, because to be able to build a business and be able to go from Rainmaker to architect isn't easy. So kind of tell me more about that journey.
Yep. So hinted around to it, but it was 2015 when I burned out, and so I previous to that, but previous to owning my first business, I was going to go into corporate. I was in corporate America, and so when I burned out, there really was, look, I say I burned out, like I literally was at the gym and started to have pains in my chest, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And that was my first time I was really having panic attacks. I mean, truthfully, I was burning it all the time. And what's crazy is that I had one business at the time that was way smaller than it is now. And so it's interesting that I have equity in 4 businesses at the current time within a $10 million holdco that we're building to 30 million by 2030. And it's amazing how much more things I do now than I did back then. But I was completely stressed out, burnout. I even have a picture that I posted years ago on Instagram that we were at Disney with our family, and I was running a team meeting. There's a picture on Instagram of the Disney Yacht Club, and it says, and here's the worst part, it says on that caption, "Better never stops, even on vacation." Like, that's how
Uh,
messed up I was about like what success looks like. And
yeah.
so that was June of 2015. It was the next it was like within 6 weeks that this scare happened. I go see physician, a friend of mine. He puts me in the EKG machine. He's like, you know what, Bradley, I actually see a couple things here that are concerning. So now I'm in a full-blown panic attack. I never had those before. He gets me in to see a cardiologist that day. The next day I do a stress test, and the cardiologist says, like, hey man, everything's fine with your heart, but like, I don't know what you got going on at 34 years old, but you might want to change some things. So it wasn't like the next day I started to architect my business. It's not like that at all. I really didn't know what to do. I was like, well, this can't continue. So I actually genuinely thought about quitting. And so I knew I could go back into pharmaceuticals, get a really nice $200,000 salary and 401k and company car and benefits and the whole 9 yards. But I also knew that that was always going to be available for me because I had, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I just mean like I could go back to that because I was a business owner. So I felt like I could, apply myself. But I was like, I want to give this another shot. I just don't know what to do different. And then that was a couple months later. I found myself in Toronto, had that experience. And so at the end of the day, I turned my business around. It was the next year, 2016. We had the best year that we'd ever had, and then we've been able to, basically double that business from where it was easily every few years from when it was where it was back then. Since then, I've founded 7 other companies and currently have equity in 4 currently. But more importantly than that, maybe that's just proof source. But what is more important than that is that we've been able to share with other people how to do the exact same thing. I don't just teach business, I still like doing business. So I still own companies, not just the consulting company, Blueprint OS. So I have equity in these other companies. And I think that's important because nothing wrong with people that just do that. I just like to still actively be in the arena with companies, with businesses, not just teaching business.
Yeah. No, very cool. And what was that initial business? What industry was it in?
Insurance.
Gotcha. Yeah. Very cool. And what one question I always like to ask people is, what is the nicest thing anyone's done for you in your professional career?
Oh my gosh. What is the nicest thing someone has ever done? Um, I yeah, I'll tell you. Nicest thing someone's ever done for me is when I was going through some tough times. Um, you know how people will say, "Hey, man, stay in touch. Stay in touch with me. Let me know. Let me know how I can help." But I had a really close friend, still a close friend to this day. He didn't do that. He just followed up. He just followed up. He just checked in genuinely. How are you? He's held me accountable still to this day as a close friend. He's a business owner and has been there with me through, some tough times and tough moments. But to me, the nicest thing someone has ever done is say that they're going to check on you, and they actually do it. They actually follow through. They actually ask you the hard questions. That is by far the best thing that's ever happened to me.
That's such a good call out because we all get so busy in our day to day, and unfortunately, it means you're kind of just absorbed with yourself and your business. I'm very guilty of this. When you can kind of pick your head up out of the sand and really like send a note to a buddy, a friend, a colleague, and be genuine, that's man, that's amazing to kind of give first. Really great example. That's really fun.
Well,
Um,
it's made a big impact on me to want to do it for other people that have been that go through some tough times to, not just say, "Hey man, keep in touch," be thinking about you, praying for you. And listen, I'm a believer, and I think that to do that, but the intentionality to continue to follow up and say, "Hey, how are you? How's the family? How's the business? What are you doing? What last time we talked was this." It's like, wow, okay, you're actually listening. I appreciate that. And it makes me want to do the same thing for other people. And I can't say that I am perfect at that, but and you're right, everybody is running their own race, right? That's the thing. We're all running our own race. And so to have somebody in your life that's doing that. I have to. It's funny that this came up because I actually have a podcast that's coming out tomorrow called Owner Island. It's about this very
Mm.
thing.
You should make some swag around that. That's like a good brand for for entrepreneurs like us that are lonely. That's great.
And I just had over 4th of July, that 2 weeks, I had so many people that in our community. I don't know if I can cuss on. I don't cuss much, but on here, but like they were just
Go
going
for
through some stuff. Okay, like
it.
I'll just say that. I mean, from literally dog attacks to some serious health concerns for them personally. parents passing away at a young age, car accidents, to think. And I was like, wow, man. And it made me to realize, like, in life, we're all going through some things, but as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you have even a higher amount of things around you, because you have to still show up and provide and be a certain way for your team and your customers and your, future prospects and your family and your friends and all these people around you. There's a lot heavier load on you. And I'm just here to tell you, hey, I know we talked about operating system and I love talking about that stuff and Rainmaker Architect, but man, you're not alone. You're not alone. There's only, I think, other business owners and entrepreneurs understand the pressures that we are under at times. And yes, the benefits are great. We get to, our income potential can be much larger than what it is just working for someone. Yes. And we get flexibility and freedom, and we can have houses and cars and trips and all that kind of stuff. And people see all that on social, and they don't understand sometimes the pressure that you're under, except for other business owners. And so I would just encourage people out there to reach out to someone else and just say, hey, you know what, you're not alone. So didn't think we'd go down that path today, but that's honestly.
No, especially people getting going. It's so fragile at an early phase. I think those check-ins are huge. But Bradley, this has been so fun, man. I feel like I could talk to you for quite a while. Your wealth of knowledge, just from like a business owner perspective. You stumped me on business books, which I kind of take pride in that. So well done. I've got a new one to add to my archive. But where can people go to follow you to learn more? Because I really love the framework you put out there. I'm kind of a framework junkie, and that's why I wanted to do this podcast, to get into the Blueprint OS and what you've done. But where can we send people for the Blueprint and for the podcast?
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. So, place to go is to our website. I'm going to give you a URL there to go to. So go to blueprintos.com/assets. We've got a lot of free tools, and even the starter kit that I'm mentioning is going to end up on that page pretty soon. But we've got a lot of free tools to be able to go to, and then also on there you'll see some upcoming above the business events that we do. So we do 6 virtual events throughout the year. 3 of them are 1 day, 3 of them are 2 days. So if you go to the assets page, you'll find your way to some of our above the business events, and that's also where you can check out the podcast. So blueprintos.com/assets. People can connect with me on LinkedIn. I am terrible at social media. My team is on me all the time. They are frustrated. That is absolutely personally my biggest weakness, because I try to stay as focused as I can on growing the businesses. So maybe one day I'll get active on actual social media, but I can connect with people on LinkedIn. So.
Yeah, and I definitely, if you like this podcast, I think you'll really like Above the Business. There's some really fun episodes in there, is around specific topics and things to go through, like people and systems, the sales whisper, and knowing your numbers. And so I think if you have a business problem, I'm pretty sure Bradley's talked about it on the podcast. So you could use it in that manner. But Bradley, thank you so much, man. It's been a blast.
Oh, thanks so much, Jim. Appreciate you having me on.